Hello, everyone. So I'm sure most of you saw the Libertarianism versus the Alt Right debate hosted by Andy Warski last night, and I just wanted to make a video in response to some of the points made and just the debate in general. First of all, that debate was absolutely fucking horrible. Mainly, it was structured from the very beginning to favor the alt-right, because both Andy and JF, the two people who were supposed to be the moderators, are partisan to the alt-right. Plus, to represent the libertarians in the debate, they got fucking that guy T. Now, I don't know whose bright idea it was to bring T on to represent the position against the alt-right and against state control of borders, but that was either a really dumb move or sabotage, depending on the intention behind that, because T, for a little over a year now, has been a lib-fash Hoppian who openly advocates for an ethno-state, so it was basically 5 against 1. In fact, half the time, Shane or T would say something, they'd end up arguing with each other. Now, this isn't to say that Shane would have done fine in a balanced stage, because frankly his performance wasn't that good either. I mean, he made some decent points, but, you know, when you're debating, what you want to do is completely shut down the other person's argument. And he couldn't do that. That's not because he couldn't, because there were several points where he could have just absolutely shut down the opposing sides, but chose a less shut and closed way of approaching it. For example, the topic of internet monopolies was brought up and how Facebook and all these other giant internet corporations censor people. Shane could have easily just pointed out how they're all subsidized to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars by the government, Google and Facebook being two of the worst examples, but instead he approached it as a, well, everyone said that MySpace had a monopoly, but MySpace fell into obscurity, so clearly these aren't monopolies. Well, I mean, to an extent that's true, and it's a relatively decent point, but it allowed for them to respond to it and claim that, oh, well, these natural monopolies do form. There was room for discussion when, if you had simply mentioned that they're subsidized, then they couldn't have responded, because there's no way to try and argue that their status is a result of a natural monopoly or that free markets are the cause of it. So, as much as the debate was structured fundamentally to be a complete dumpster fire, not all the blame can go on the planners. Now, for the alt-right, their main argument was that people would naturally segregate themselves even without a state, and that an ethno-state is therefore required to enforce this. So the main premise of their entire argument is based on an incredibly broken line of reasoning that doesn't even make sense in its proposition. And that's why I'm honestly kind of triggered about this debate. The individualist libertarian position should have absolutely fucking smashed these fools. They can't even propose the concept of what they believe in without it starting to fall apart, because what they believe in makes no fucking sense. Why would you need a state to enforce what you want if your claim is that what you want is natural? If you honestly believe that, you would be an anarchist, because there is absolutely no need for violent coercion if it's natural. No. Sorry, but you alt-right ethno-nationalist types pretending to be libertarians, you know full well exactly what you're doing.
Sure. So my view, I guess, of an ideal state in terms of libertarianism, in the first place, I agree with Ryan that the ethnic characteristic of a population is going to impact the probability of that population constructing a libertarian society. But in terms of what I think would be optimal, in many ways would be more libertarian than the current state. So I don't like, I would be in favor of complete free trade. I don't like corporate taxes. I'm pro the legalization of a lot of drugs and things like this. I like a non-interventionist foreign policy. But I do also like a certain degree of paternalism, which is quite anti-libertarian in terms of sin taxes and the government using taxes to incentivize certain good behavior like marriage.
I don't trust. Now, regarding the United States federal government, I'll agree. This is where I agree with you. I'm like an anarcho-capitalist with regards to the current United States federal government. So, but for example, I've come to look at industrial policy as a good thing. I Yeah, I just sort of see like emergent authoritarianism.
You're just disguising your blatantly totalitarian beliefs under the guise that you don't believe in force and coercion and trying to appeal to the libertarian crowd. No. You either believe in individual liberty and non-aggression and therefore oppose the alt-right, or you believe in an ethno-state, and in which case you're not libertarians. There is no common ground here, because one of these beliefs is collectivist and requires force to sustain, by your own admission. And if that's the case, it can't be individualist or libertarian. Now, I'm not very well educated on this topic, but based on the historical examples I am familiar with of societies which had very little control over immigration, if not none at all, such as the United States prior to 1920, Liechtenstein, or ancient Ireland, I'd say that there are at most only superficial connections between homogeneity and the improvement of society. What about Canada, where the overwhelming majority of the population is ethnically European and their society and their economy are in shambles? Or the majority of Southeast Asia with the same problem for ethnic Asians, despite ethnic Asians being represented on the bell curve, supposedly on average having an even higher IQ than ethnic Europeans? What about black people in the United States having on average a higher IQ than black people in Africa? There are so many self-evident holes in the race realism hypothesis that a lot of the alt-right's claims about IQ are just straight-up bullshit. Like, not even a possible misunderstanding, as in either the person they heard it from was talking out of their ass, or they are talking out of their ass. For instance, another baffling claim made by these alt-right types is that based on intelligence, we can determine behavioral characteristics. There is absolutely no base for any attempt to connect IQ to behavior, and if you actually knew the first thing about IQ, you'd realize that IQ does not actually measure intelligence, only the processing of information. There have been multiple studies where it has not only been demonstrated but shown to be repeatable that IQ is affect motivated, such as a 46-study long test which showed that if you provide a monetary incentive for people to take the test and perform well, the average IQ of the person taking the test greatly increases. So IQ has been proven beyond a shadow of a doubt to not be a static, undeniable figure, and it doesn't even represent intelligence. Yet alt-righters claim that it does represent intelligence, and therefore somehow from that we can get behavioral characteristics. Or that intelligence directly affects political views, which, like the last, if you factor in different countries, then this connection quickly fades. For instance, if you compare the US to Canada. Basically, their problem with IQ is that it's too nuanced of a topic to be looked at from a black and white perspective the way that they do. It has too many gray areas, and they don't account for all these variables. But enough of my objections to the alt-right and race realism, and back onto the debate in question. What I find probably the most hilarious is how the ethno-statists and the chat referred to Shane and libertarianism as being left-wing on borders, because their idea of an ethno-state and the concept behind it is based on Gramsci's theory of cultural hegemony, which is a Marxist philosophy proposed as a potential explanation for how the capitalist class keeps their power. Which leads me to one of my biggest issues with their points, and that's the idea that black people work as a collective and that there's no individuality to any of them. And they'll tell you this straight to your face. I mean, one of the points alternative hypothesis unironically argued is that an ANCAP society would be overrun in military strength by all of the brown people trying to take it over. All these brown people, as you put it, aren't just gonna mesh together like the fucking Borg and try and take over society just because there's no state. Why wouldn't they just do that now if that was the case? According to your argument, their societies are more authoritarian. I mean, no joke, I was laughing out loud for like a solid minute the first time I heard this. This seems more like a meme libertarians would make to make fun of statist arguments rather than an actual argument proposed by someone actually trying to refute libertarianism. Now, I don't really have the time to go through the entire debate and point out every stupid thing said by the ethno-statist side, but also because half of the shit they say makes absolutely no sense. As in, I went out partying with some friends and smoked some pot laced with acid, which, by the way, is a big part of the reason this video took like 3 days to upload, because I was originally going to upload it immediately after the debate happened, and my thoughts were better formulated in that state than alt-hypes were actually making his arguments.
To look at industrial policy as a good thing, I just sort of see like emergent authoritarianism, right? And for example, video games like World of Tanks, for example, that still has artillery in the game, and like everyone hates it, but they can do it because they're the only game in town.
That got that way because they got all these favors from the government. So, I mean, if you're the only maker of fidget spinners and you're enjoying your fidget spinner monopoly, and I say, hey, this is an opportunity, and I make my own little fidget spinner business, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah. Well, I don't think. Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you go ahead.
Oh, I don't think that a formal monopoly is necessary to create the problems that are being talked about.
But anyway, this debate was a complete fucking disgrace. The panel should have been better balanced. The ethno-statists were making hilariously retarded arguments that weren't going challenged, which I'm sure that has nothing to do with the imbalanced nature of the panel and how it was planned. And overall, this should have been done better. That moves me to my last point. Can you please stop pointing to statism as an argument against the efficiency of an anarchist society? A large part of the alt-right argument was that people of other ethnicities tend to vote different ways. Aside from the fact that, as noted earlier, there is no correlation between ethnicity and political ideology, nor is there any proof that these two things are connected, voting can't happen in an anarchy, because voting requires coercive political hierarchy to enforce. Also, libertarians mostly seek to abolish the state through agorism, not voting, since partyarchy is coercive. Using the function of the state to argue against how our society would operate would be like me using the effects of a multicultural government policy to argue against the ethno-state. It doesn't make you sound more intelligent, it doesn't add to the conversation, it doesn't provide like a gotcha, it just makes you look like a fucking retard. There will be no military takeover because militaries can't exist without tax funding. Plus, even if somehow they could, there would be thousands of private security companies to protect the people paying for them with more efficient technology than the state. And the entirety of the population in the anarchist society also has technology that's as efficient, if not more efficient, than the private security firms. Sorry, statists, this is a dumb argument. You're right that states would probably try and fight against the anarchist society emerging, but that exercise would prove to be futile pretty quickly. I'm gonna leave it on this response in the chat. While I was battling ethno-statists, I pointed out that these monopolies in social media are forming because social media sites are being subsidized, which means that there's no loss to their profits when they lose users. And True Deal Tom, somebody who's also supposedly a libertarian, comes along and says, "Nuh-uh! I am right! I am right! Ree!"